Blood dripped from the edge of the kitchen knife, forming a small crimson pool on the polished floor of Wilson's Market. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across Marcus Reeves' face. His eyes were wide but empty, like dark portals to another world. Two bodies lay at his feet, the elderly store owner and a young woman who had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Marcus stood motionless, knife in one hand, a bag of stolen snacks in the other. "Level complete," he whispered to himself, the corners of his mouth twitching upward. "New high score." A distant siren wailed, growing louder. But Marcus didn't run. Instead, he sat cross-legged on the floor beside his victims, pulled out a candy bar from his bag, and began to eat. The blood on his hands left smudges on the wrapper. He didn't seem to notice or care. When the police burst through the door 90 seconds later, they found a 26-year-old man calmly eating chocolate, surrounded by death, muttering about respawn points and power-ups. 3 months earlier, the apartment smelled of stale pizza and unwashed clothes. Marcus Reeves hadn't opened a window in weeks. The blinds were permanently drawn, allowing only thin slices of sunlight to penetrate the darkness. The glow from multiple screens provided most of the illumination: a 32-inch monitor for his PC gaming setup, a secondary monitor for Discord and game guides, and a wall-mounted TV for console gaming. Marcus slid his headset off and rubbed his bloodshot eyes. He'd been playing Netherworld Apocalypse for 14 hours straight. His hands trembled slightly, a combination of caffeine overdose and sleep deprivation. A notification pinged on his phone. It was his boss, Claudia, from the IT support company, where Marcus worked remotely. "I've noticed you've been clocking out early. We need to talk tomorrow. Video call at 10 a.m. Marcus deleted the message without responding. He'd been faking his work hours for weeks, logging in but then immediately switching to gaming, while occasionally responding to urgent tickets. He'd deal with Claudia tomorrow, or maybe he wouldn't. The game was more important now. Netherworld Apocalypse was unlike anything Marcus had played before. An open-world survival game with unprecedented immersion and realism. The NPCs behaved with an almost uncanny intelligence, and the game's AI adapted to each player's style. It was still in beta, but Marcus had spent a small fortune to get early access. The game had consumed him from the moment he started playing. His character, Dark Messiah, had reached levels few other players had. He'd gained a small following on streaming platforms, though nothing that could sustain him financially. He opened the refrigerator, finding it nearly empty except for energy drinks and a moldy sandwich. He'd need to get groceries soon, but that would mean leaving the apartment, leaving the game. "Just a few more missions," he mumbled to himself as he cracked open another energy drink and settled back into his gaming chair. His phone rang. It was his sister, Ellie. He silenced it without looking. She'd been calling regularly since their mother's funeral 2 months ago, but Marcus had gradually stopped responding. She didn't understand the importance of what he was doing in the game. Nobody did. The Netherworld login screen pulsed with dark energy as the game loaded. Marcus slipped his headset back on, and reality faded away. "You're not eating," Ellie said, pushing a plate of pasta toward her brother across the small cafe table. It had taken 3 weeks of persistent calling before Marcus finally agreed to meet her for lunch. He looked terrible thinner than she remembered, with dark circles under his eyes and a pallid complexion that spoke of too much time indoors. "I eat," Marcus replied, his voice slightly hoarse from disuse. He couldn't remember the last time he'd had a conversation that wasn't through a headset or text chat. "Energy drinks and junk food don't count as eating, Marcus." Ellie's voice was firm but gentle. She'd been worried about her brother since their mother passed, but his decline had accelerated beyond what she'd feared. Marcus picked at his food, taking small, mechanical bites. The restaurant felt too bright, too loud, too real. The clink of silverware, the murmur of conversations, the subtle sense of garlic and wineite all seemed overwhelming after the controlled environment of his apartment. "I got you something," Ellie said, reaching into her bag. She produced a small plant in a ceramic pot. "It's a peace lily. Low maintenance, but you need to water it once a week. I thought it might brighten up your place." Marcus stared at the plant like it was an alien artifact. My apartment doesn't get much sunlight. It doesn't need much, Ellie insisted, pushing it toward him. Just a little care. Marcus took the plant reluctantly. He knew what Ellie was doing, trying to give him responsibility for something living, something that existed outside of his digital world. It was the kind of psychological trick their mother, a therapist, would have attempted. How's work? Ellie asked, changing the subject. Marcus shrugged. Fine. He didn't mention that he'd been formally reprimanded by Claudia last week, or that he was on probation, one misstep away from being fired. And are you? Are you still playing that game all the time? Ellie tried to keep her tone neutral, but concern seeped through. Marcus felt a flash of irritation. It's not just a game, Ellie. It's... He stopped himself. How could he explain what Netherworld meant to him? How it had become more meaningful, more real than his everyday life. How in the game he was powerful, respected, in control of everything he wasn't in reality. It's important to me, he finished lamely. Ellie reached across the table and took his hand. Her touch felt strangely foreign. When was the last time he'd had physical contact with another person? I'm worried about you, Marcus. Since Mom died, you've been shutting everyone out. You barely leave your apartment. You don't return calls. This isn't healthy. I'm fine, Marcus insisted, pulling his hand away. I'm dealing with things my own way. By escaping into a fantasy world? The words stung because they contained truth. But Marcus had long since mastered the art of denial. You don't understand, he said, his voice hardening. Nobody does. Ellie's expression softened. Then help me understand. Talk to me, Marcus. Remember how we used to tell each other everything? For a brief moment, something cracked in Marcus's carefully constructed wall. A flicker of the person he used to be before the game, before their mother's death, before he began his slow descent into isolation emerged. I feel more alive in there than I do out here, he admitted quietly. Is that crazy? No, Ellie said gently, but it's concerning. There's so much real life to experience, Marcus. The moment of vulnerability passed as quickly as it had appeared. Marcus checked his watch. He'd been away from the game for almost 2 hours. His palms itched with the need to return, to grasp his controller or keyboard. I should go, he said, standing abruptly. I have work to do. Ellie's face fell, but she nodded. Just call me sometimes, okay? And remember to water the plant. Marcus nodded, already mentally back in his apartment, back in Netherworld. The peace lily felt like a burden in his hands, a tether to a reality he was increasingly eager to escape. 2 weeks later, the peace lily was dead, its leaves brown and withered. Marcus barely noticed. His life had narrowed to a pinpoint focus, the game, and only the game. He'd been fired from his job the previous week after missing 3 consecutive client calls. The termination email had included a recommendation for counseling services, which Marcus had deleted without reading. His bank account was dwindling, but he still had enough savings to last a while if he was careful. The latest update to Netherworld. Apocalypse had introduced a new zone called the Veil, where the boundaries between the digital world and reality seemed to blur. Players reported strange experiences while exploring this area, sounds that seemed to come from outside their headphones, visual glitches that affected their perception even after logging off. The developers had issued a warning statement, recommending that players limit their time in the Veil to 1 hour per session. Internet forums buzzed with conspiracy theories about subliminal messaging or experimental sensory technology embedded in the game. Marcus ignored the warnings. He'd spent the last 72 hours almost exclusively in the Veil, leaving only for brief bathroom breaks and to consume the bare minimum of food and caffeine necessary to keep playing. The experience was unlike anything he'd ever known. The game seemed to anticipate his thoughts, responding to his actions before he even completed them. The NPCs spoke to him with an intimacy that felt personal, as if they knew him, as if they were real. His character, Dark Messiah, had discovered a hidden quest line that few other players had accessed. It involved infiltrating a faction called the Awoken, who believed the game world was the true reality and the outside world was the illusion. As Marcus progressed through the quest, the line between player and character began to blur. He started talking to himself in Dark Messiah's voice, adopting his mannerisms even when away from the keyboard. He began to see game interfaces overlaid on his real-world vision health bars above people's heads on the rare occasions he ventured outside, mini-maps in the corner of his eye. He knew, on some level, that these were hallucinations born of sleep deprivation and an overtaxed mind. But another part of him wondered if the Awoken might be right. What if this supposed reality was the true illusion? Marcus's phone rang, breaking his concentration. It was Ellie again. He considered ignoring it as usual, but something, perhaps a last tenuous connection to his former self, made him answer. "Marcus? Oh, thank God. I've been trying to reach you for days." Ellie's voice was sharp with worry. "I've been busy," he replied, his own voice sounding strange to his ears, as if it belonged to someone else. "Busy? Marcus? I spoke to Claudia. She told me you were fired 2 weeks ago. Why didn't you tell me?" Marcus felt a surge of anger. "You had no right to contact my boss." "I was worried. You haven't been answering my calls. Your neighbors say they haven't seen you in weeks. And now this?" Ellie's voice cracked. "Marcus, I'm coming over. We need to talk about this in person." "No," Marcus said sharply. "Don't come here. I'm fine. I'm just figuring things out." "Figuring what out?" "How to completely disconnect from reality. How to waste your life in front of a screen." The frustration in Ellie's voice was palpable. Something dark and cold settled in Marcus's chest. "You sound just like Mom," he said, his voice low and venomous. "Always thinking you know what's best for everyone else." The line went silent for a moment. Then, quietly, "That's not fair, Marcus." "Life isn't fair," he replied automatically, quoting one of Dark Messiah's frequent lines from the game. "The system is rigged against those who see the truth." "What are you talking about? You're not making sense." Ellie's worry had deepened to alarm. "I'm coming over. Now, don't argue." Marcus ended the call without responding. He turned his phone off and tossed it aside. Ellie wouldn't understand. No one who hadn't experienced the veil could understand what he'd discovered. He turned back to his screen, where Dark Messiah stood at the threshold of a portal that pulsed with otherworldly energy. The next phase of the quest awaited. Reality could wait. Marcus didn't answer the door when Ellie knocked an hour later. He didn't hear her calling his name through the door. Didn't notice when she eventually gave up and left. He was too deep in the veil, too committed to the quest. Too far gone. The eviction notice came 5 days later, slipped under his door by the building manager. Marcus glanced at it briefly, before letting it fall to the floor among the empty food containers and discarded clothes. It meant nothing to him now. His electricity had been shut off the day before, after months of unpaid bills. But Marcus had been prepared. He'd purchased a generator and enough fuel to keep his gaming setup running for several more days. The constant hum of the machine added to the unreality of his apartment, now lit only by the glow of his screens. Marcus hadn't slept in what might have been days. Time had become a meaningless concept, measured only in game progress and quest completions. His body ached from sitting in the same position for hours, but he barely registered the discomfort. Physical sensations had become distant, secondary to the vivid experiences within Netherworld. The quest had led Dark Messiah deeper into the Awoken's territory. The faction leaders had revealed their ultimate goal, to break through the barrier between worlds and allow their consciousness to fully enter the real world, which they insisted was merely another level of the game. The game's narrative had taken a dark turn, with the Awoken carrying out violent actions against NPCs who opposed them, insisting that since nothing was truly real, there could be no true harm. Marcus found himself making choices for Dark Messiah that he once would have avoided, brutal, merciless decisions that advanced his standing with the Awoken, but left a trail of virtual bodies in his wake. With each violent act in the game, the boundary between Marcus and Dark Messiah seemed to dissolve further. He began to see game prompts in his peripheral vision even when looking away from the screen. Hunger level critical. Hygiene status poor. Mental stability declining. He ignored these warnings, just as he ignored the similar signals from his own body. What mattered was the mission, the truth that the Awoken had promised to reveal once he proved his loyalty. A pounding at his door finally broke through his concentration. It was louder and more insistent than Ellie's previous attempts. Marcus Reeves, this is the police. We've received a wellness check request from your sister. Open the door, please. Marcus froze, his hands hovering over the keyboard. The police? Why would Ellie call the police? New objective: avoid detection. The prompt seemed to float in the air before him, as real as the door or the generator or his own trembling hands. Mr. Reeves, we can hear movement in there. Please open the door, or we'll have to force entry. Marcus looked around frantically. His apartment was a disaster, food containers everywhere, the generator rumbling in violation of building codes, the eviction notice on the floor. They wouldn't understand. They'd try to take him away, to separate him from the game, from Dark Messiah, from the Veil. Choose your response. 1. Surrender. 2. Negotiate. 3. Escape. The options hovered before him, as clear as if they were displayed on his monitor. Without hesitation, Marcus selected option 3. He grabbed his backpack, shoving in his laptop, a handful of energy bars, and his wallet. The pounding at the door grew more insistent. He heard the rattle of keys. The building manager must be giving the police access. Marcus moved to the window that led to the fire escape. As he climbed out, he glanced back at his gaming setup, the multiple monitors, the high-end PC tower, the console. All of it would have to be abandoned. But it didn't matter. The game was in his head now. The interface was part of him. He descended the fire escape as the sound of his apartment door being opened echoed from above. The afternoon sunlight was blinding after so many weeks in near darkness. His legs felt weak, unaccustomed to movement more complex than shifting in his chair. Objective updated. Find supplies. The prompt guided him as he made his way through back alleys, avoiding main streets where he might be spotted. His perception was a bizarre mixture of reality and game interface. People he passed had health bars and status indicators floating above them. Cars looked like potential vehicles he could hijack, as in the driving segments of Netherworld. His stomach growled painfully. When had he last eaten? A day ago? 2? The hunger was becoming impossible to ignore. Critical status: find food immediately. Marcus spotted a small corner market ahead Wilson's Market, according to the faded sign above the door. It looked like the type of place that would have security cameras but no guards. An easy target for a quick supply run. He pulled his hoodie up over his head and entered the store. The fluorescent lighting made his eyes water after so long in the dim environment of his apartment. An elderly man stood behind the counter, the shopkeeper, obviously. A young woman browsed the refrigerated section, the only other person in the store. Mission: acquire supplies without detection. Marcus moved through the aisles, grabbing energy drinks, protein bars, and non-perishable snacks. His movements felt like they were being directed by an external force, as if he were watching himself play a character in third-person view. When he approached the counter, the elderly shopkeeper gave him a concerned look. "You all right, son? You don't look so good." Marcus stared at the man, seeing not just his weathered face, but also the data that seemed to hover around him. Wilson, shop owner, level 5, perception, high. "I'm fine," Marcus mumbled, placing his items on the counter. He reached for his wallet, then realized, with a sinking feeling, that he had almost no cash. His credit cards had surely been deactivated after months of non-payment. "That'll be 24.75, the shopkeeper said. Marcus stood frozen, his mind racing. The game interface seemed to offer new options. Choose your action. 1. Flee without paying. 2. Negotiate a lower price. 3. Eliminate obstacle. The third option pulsed with a red glow that seemed to fill Marcus's vision. Without conscious thought, his hand moved to the kitchen knife display near the counter. His fingers closed around the handle of the largest one. "Son, you need to pay for those items," the shopkeeper said, his voice firming with suspicion. The young woman had approached the counter now, waiting her turn. She glanced at Marcus with mild interest, then looked away. Witnesses present, 1. In one fluid motion, Marcus raised the knife. Something in his expression must have changed, because the shopkeeper's eyes widened in sudden fear. Now wait a minute. The knife came down. Once, twice, 3 times. The shopkeeper crumpled without a sound. The young woman screamed, dropping her basket of groceries. She turned to run, but Marcus was faster, driven by a logic that existed only in the warped reality of his mind. Eliminate all witnesses. A distant part of Marcus buried deep beneath layers of psychosis, sleep deprivation, and digital addiction tried to surface, tried to scream that this was real, that these were people, not NPCs or game characters. But that voice was too weak, too easily silenced by the louder commands of the interface only he could see. When it was over, Marcus stood in the silent store, knife in hand, blood spattering his clothes and face. The interface rewarded him with notifications. Mission complete. Resources acquired. New high score. He gathered his supplies into a bag, moving methodically, as if completing a familiar task in the game. He heard sirens in the distance but felt no urgency, no fear. Just a curiosity about what the next quest objective might be. Marcus sat on the floor, cross-legged, and opened an energy drink and a candy bar. He needed to replenish his stats before the next mission. The blood on his hands left smudges on the wrapper, but he didn't notice. In his mind, it was just another visual effect, another element of the immersive experience that had become his reality. The sirens grew louder. Marcus finished his snack and waited for the next prompt, the next objective. The knife rested beside him, its blade catching the fluorescent light. Game over. The words seemed to float before him as the police burst through the door, weapons drawn, shouting commands he couldn't quite process. Marcus smiled faintly. Game over just meant it was time to respawn, to try again with the knowledge he'd gained. That's how games worked. As they handcuffed him and led him away, Marcus looked back at the scene of carnage with detached interest. It didn't feel real to him, none of it did. Not the blood, not the bodies, not the police, not the shocked faces of onlookers as he was placed in the back of a patrol car. In his mind, he was still in the Veil, still playing Netherworld, still Dark Messiah. And somewhere, in a different reality, perhaps the Awoken were smiling, having successfully breached the barrier between worlds, having claimed another soul for their crusade. Marcus closed his eyes in the back of the police car and waited for the loading screen, for the respawn point, for the game to continue. But it never did. In a sterile room with padded walls, Marcus Reeves sits motionless on the edge of a bed, his eyes fixed on a point in space that only he can see. The doctors have diagnosed him with gaming disorder complicated by psychosis, exacerbated by extreme sleep deprivation and nutritional deficiency. They've tried various medications, therapy approaches, even periods of lucidity where Marcus seemed to recognize the horror of what he'd done. But those moments never last. He always slips back into the veil, back into the belief that reality is just another level of the game. Sometimes he speaks, carrying on conversations with NPCs only he can see. Sometimes he makes motions with his hands as if manipulating invisible controls. Sometimes he sits perfectly still for hours, as if waiting for the next prompt, the next directive. Ellie visits once a month, though Marcus rarely acknowledges her presence. She brings fresh flowers to replace the ones that have wilted. She tells him about her life, about the outside world, hoping that something might break through, might bring her brother back from wherever his mind has gone. Today, as she prepares to leave, something different happens. Marcus turns to look directly at her, the first eye contact he's made in months. "Ellie," he says, his voice hoarse from disuse. Her heart leaps. "Yes, Marcus, it's me." For a brief moment, his eyes seem clear, present. "I killed those people, didn't I? It wasn't a game." Tears spring to Ellie's eyes. "No, Marcus, it wasn't a game." He nods slowly, processing this information. I thought I would respawn, that they would respawn." His voice breaks. "But that's not how it works here, is it?" "No," Ellie says gently. That's not how it works. Marcus's gaze drifts back to the middle distance, but he continues speaking. I can still see it sometimes. The interface, the prompts. But I know now. I know it's not real. He looks down at his hands. I can't take it back, can I? What I did? No, Ellie whispers. But recognizing what happened is the first step, Marcus. It's a beginning. He nods again, but she can already see him slipping away, his brief moment of clarity fading like a system shutting down. His eyes glaze over, returning to that vacant stare. His hands twitch slightly, as if pressing buttons on an invisible controller. Marcus, Ellie says, but he doesn't respond. He's gone again, back to the veil, back to the false reality that his broken mind created to escape the horror of what he's done. As Ellie leaves the facility, a light rain begins to fall. She thinks about the peace lily she'd given Marcus months ago, now long dead and discarded. About how a little care, a little attention might have saved it, might have saved him. But some things, once broken, can never be fully restored. Some lines, once crossed, allow no return journey. In his room, Marcus waits for the next prompt, the next mission. He will wait forever, trapped in a game that never ends, a reality of his own making where consequences can be escaped with a respawn, where morality is measured in points and levels, where human life has no more value than pixels on a screen. A game without a reset button, a story without a happy ending.